You're watching LMCC.
Hello and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Peg DuBoard with the League of Women Voters South Tonka, and also with me from the League is Cindy Holker. Today we are doing a recap of the 2022 legislative session with State Representative Kelly Morrison, who was elected in 2018 in District 33B. Welcome, Representative Morrison. Thank you for being with us today. The focus of our program is to provide our viewers with a summary of the legislative session and take a look at what might be on the docket for the upcoming 2023 legislative session.
We've divided our questions today into legislative categories, which include education, general health and women's health, clean water, climate, and infrastructure. In each category, what we'd like you to do is focus on past accomplishments, either in this last session or with the 2021 biennium budget. We'd also like your understanding of what legislation will have major visibility in the coming year. And also in this time of really high partisanship, we'd love to understand where you see some really good mesh of bipartisan support for some of this legislation. So let's start with education. Can you talk about what major legislation accomplishments happened in the last year or so?
Sure. Well, first, I just want to thank you both for the opportunity to talk about the legislative session today. And I do want to start with good news, I guess, too, because Minnesota has stood out in the last several years as being either the only or one of the only divided legislatures in the country. And as you mentioned, during very partisan times. And I think we can all be proud that 3 of the last 4 years, the divided legislature has come together to form budgets and bonding bills. And I think that that's a real accomplishment that we can all feel good about and feel proud of. Government is functioning in Minnesota. Now, having said that, this year we fell short. We unfortunately were unable to come to an agreement on a lot of the major issues facing Minnesotans today. And I think that was a disappointment to a lot of us and to a lot of our state, knowing that we're coming out of this pandemic, hopefully, and we have a significant surplus. And I do think that the governor and the Senate Majority Leader Miller and the House Speaker Hortman formed a pretty reasonable agreement. And the 3 of them agreed to it, written agreement, to leave $4 billion on the bottom line. Given the uncertainty of these times, I think that was a very sensible approach. $4 billion worth of tax cuts. It would have been a historic tax cut for Minnesotans, and then $4 billion in additional spending to help Minnesota come out of this pandemic. So it was disappointing that the Senate walked away from those negotiations eventually. I'm still hopeful that we may have a special session, perhaps just to craft a bonding bill, but we'll have to see. As we get closer to the election, that probably becomes less likely. But in terms of education, in 2021, we did pass a bipartisan education policy and finance bill that represented one of the biggest increases in spending and investment in education in more than 15 years in Minnesota. So that was a real accomplishment. We helped to ease some of the burden that the districts take on with special education cross-subsidy and English learner cross-subsidies. Some of my priorities in the area of education have included early childhood education, because I've served on that committee for the 4 years that I've been in the legislature. And I really think we have to invest in our youngest Minnesotans because they are the future. And we know that our opportunity gaps start even before school begins. So I had some bills to, for example, increase funding for universal voluntary home visiting, so that both pregnant women toward the end of their pregnancies and then in the early postpartum period can get connected to the resources in their communities, can receive some education on infant care and also early childhood care, get them plugged into their communities and the resources. It can be a very isolating time to be a new mom, and those are critical moments that we have to take advantage of in terms of infants and early child development. I also had an emphasis, on mental health. We know that we have a mental health crisis in our youth today, and we can debate the reasons why, but I think most people agree that part of the issue is the advent of iPhones and personal devices and the ubiquitousness of screens in kids' lives, compounded by the pandemic that was very isolating for kids. And so I championed a bill to provide digital education grants to help kids learn to become really smart users of technology. We're not going to get technology out of their lives. It can be a net positive, but they've got to grow up with the skills to use it appropriately. So that was signed into law. Another one in that area is limiting the use of individual screens for our very youngest learners. So encouraging our pre-K and kindergartens to not have individual screen use for those kids. So they can use a screen for engagement with their teacher or if they're doing a group activity, but kids shouldn't go off in the corner when they're 3 and 4 and 5 years old with a screen by themselves. And that was signed into law, and that took effect July 1st. So I could go on at great length about education, but we should probably move on.
Sure. One quick add-on question. I know critical race theory has been kind of a hot button topic in a lot of states. Can you talk about what impact that may have in Minnesota and any activity along those lines?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's sort of been a little bit of a made-up wedge issue. Critical race theory is a legal theory that's used in law schools. It's not part of any curriculum in public schools in Minnesota. And there's some debate around teaching American history. And I'm sort of the camp that I think it's important that we teach accurate history. And some of our history is uncomfortable. But I think it's important that all of our youngest Minnesotans are equipped with the facts so that they can go on and be the best and smartest global citizens. And so that we can all continue to strive toward that American ideal that we've never quite reached. But boy, I'm sort of a person who thinks that the world needs America. And so we need to be honest about our history. We need to teach kids the facts so that they can continue to move forward and improve our country.
Great. Anything coming up in the next year or two on the education front that you think is worth throwing out there and mentioning?
Oh my goodness, I'm sure a lot, and a lot of this will depend on what the makeup of the legislature is next session and who our governor is. But I do think that there is a real understanding that we really have to tackle our disparities in Minnesota. We have some unacceptable racial disparities. And getting on top of those is both the moral thing to do, but it's also the economically smart thing to do for our state. We can't have certain people be left behind from a brighter future in Minnesota. So I think that will be certainly a big push on, hopefully on both sides of the aisle, and I think that's true.
Great. Let's move on. Let's move on to major health-related issues that were passed in the last session.
Yeah, so let's see. In 2021, we had a significant Health and Human Services budget passed, and one of the bills that I'm actually most proud of that I championed was extending medical assistance to 12 months postpartum. In Minnesota, women who received health insurance for medical assistance were kicked off insurance at 2 months postpartum. And again, given the racial disparities that exist in maternal mortality and morbidity in Minnesota, given our substance use disorder crisis, given our mental health crisis, we have to make sure that new moms and their babies have access to the care that they need. So I was really proud to champion this bipartisan effort to make sure that those new moms have health insurance until 12 months postpartum. Let's see, we also passed reinsurance actually this past year, which helps to stabilize healthcare costs for people who get their insurance on the individual market. That was also a bipartisan effort. And at the very end of the session, we passed what was sort of designated a mini Omnibus mental health package. And that included some important investments in mental health care, particularly for our youth. Including a moratorium on exempting the hospital moratorium for hospitals who are creating mental health beds. So Children's Hospital in St. Paul, for example, is adding just a really significant investment in their inpatient beds that allow parents to stay with the kids during the mental health crisis. It's so needed, and it really represents an improvement in that situation in Minnesota.
Great. I know drug prices are kind of another hot button at the national level. What about activity at the state level regarding drug pricing?
Yeah, we've worked a lot on that, actually. We have recent federal news, hopefully, if this package does pass and President Biden signs it into law, that will allow Medicare to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies, finally. That's just a common sense approach to helping to drive down the cost of prescription drugs. But in Minnesota, one effort that got a lot of attention, I think, for obvious reasons, is the Alex Smith Insulin Affordability Act. Alex Smith was a 26-year-old young man who had insulin-dependent diabetes and rotated off his parents' health insurance when he was 26 per the Affordable Care Act and couldn't afford it. He was a young working person. Insulin's very expensive, and so he started to ration his insulin to try to get by till he was able to afford his next doses, and he died. He died in Minnesota. And his parents are incredible people who just turned their lives upside down to turn his tragedy into something positive for other people. And so that was, again, a bipartisan effort, and I served on the conference committee that hashed out the final details of that bill. But we now in Minnesota have a program that allows people to have access to emergency insulin. It's a little bit of a Band-Aid when you look at the bigger picture, but if you have insulin-dependent diabetes, it's like oxygen. You can't survive without it. And so making sure that people who have diabetes are able to get the medicine that they need to live, I think is key. I also worked on a bill called the Drug Price Transparency Act with Senator Julie Rosen, Republican senator from southern Minnesota, to ask pharmaceutical companies to report to the Department of Health the reasons why they priced high-cost drugs the way they did. So how much did they spend on marketing? How much did they spend on research and development? Just so we can get a better idea of why they were pricing those drugs as high as they were. Because if people can't afford drugs, they don't work. If you can't access them, there's no point in having them. So the Department of Health is just starting to collect that information because it was signed into law, and we hope that will both create some transparency with the public, hopefully pressure the pharmaceutical companies a little bit, and also to help inform future policy.
What kind of resistance did you have from the drug companies? Did you have any, or?
Oh, quite a bit, yeah. They prefer to not have to share that information.
Sure. Yeah. Great. How about going on to this next session? We haven't touched much on women's reproductive rights, which has been another big issue on the table. Can you talk a little bit about what's ahead in Minnesota, where you think there's opportunities and what you're looking at as we move into 2023? Yeah. The Supreme Court has really thrown us into a different place with their Dobbs decision, which overturned the longstanding Roe versus Wade decision that gave women the right to abortion care. In the wake of the Texas bill, SB 8, that basically banned abortion in Texas and then also empowered people to sue their fellow citizens if they had any hand in assisting someone to obtain an abortion, we formed the Reproductive Freedom Caucus in the legislature, knowing that we needed to prepare and organize. We saw what was coming with the three most recent Supreme Court nominees. We knew this was an anti-Roe court, so we assumed that this was coming. It was still pretty shocking when it happened. But so that has been an organizing effort, and we have several bills that we're championing in the legislature. One is the Protect Reproductive Options Act that I'm carrying in the House currently, and that would enshrine into law the right to access to reproductive health care for Minnesotans, including abortion care. The decision as to whether and when to become a parent is such a personal decision that really the government probably shouldn't be involved in that, in my view, and I think in most people's view. We also are championing the Patients' Right to Know Act, which would ensure that
Physicians are not required to read medically inaccurate information to patients, which is what we currently have in Minnesota law. We have a script that was written by anti-abortion politicians to patients 24 hours before they undergo an abortion procedure. And this would also protect patients from receiving inaccurate or non-scientific information from their providers. We also have the Protect Access to Contraception Act, which would enshrine the Affordable Care Act's mandate that people have access to contraception, which is an important part of basic health care for about half the population. So a lot of effort, a lot of conversation in that area. As the only OBGYN in the legislature, I feel a particular responsibility to be a clear voice about what the facts are around reproductive health care, and also to be a voice to protect access to that care. Minnesota is going to find itself in this position. We've been a little bit of an oasis of access to that kind of care in the upper Midwest as the states around us have chipped away at those rights, but now we really are looking at the possibility of becoming a sanctuary state as states across the country are banning abortion. And I guess the last thing I would say on that is, banning abortion doesn't end abortion. As long as people are able to become pregnant, there will be some people for a variety of different reasons who will need to or want to end a pregnancy. And so we need to make sure that that access is protected.
Is there any hope for bipartisan efforts along those lines?
I certainly hope so. I certainly hope so. And I think there are some signs. I know there are a lot of Republicans who are pro-choice, but the way that party is constructed right now, they don't have a lot of freedom to speak that way. So I hope that that's an evolving issue, because I think there's really a lot of agreement. Polling across the country would indicate that most Americans support access to abortion care.
Great.
Well, thanks. We know that clean water is one of your passions. So tell us a little bit about what's happening legislatively relative to clean water.
Oh my gosh. Well, here we are in Minnesota sitting on this wealth of clean water. And, we're in Minnesota, one of the fastest warming states in the country. We're starting to really tangibly and palpably feel some of the effects of climate change. We're seeing droughts, we're seeing extreme weather events, we're seeing flooding, all of those things relate to climate change. And we're seeing increasingly water scarcity, particularly in the American West and Southwest. And so I think it's our obligation here in Minnesota to be extremely careful and planful about how we manage our water. Here we are with Lake Superior, which has 11% of the Earth's clean water or fresh water. And then, of course, we are the land of more than actually 11,000 lakes, right? But we have a little bit of
counting.
Exactly. More than Wisconsin, I would say so. But we have a little bit of a patchwork approach to protecting our water. And it touches on in so many different areas. So a bill that I championed, actually in the higher ed bill, and it was in the final higher ed bill that unfortunately was not passed into law, along with several of the other omnibus bills this year, asks the University of Minnesota's Water Council to create a science-based 50-year clean water plan for Minnesota. So what are the policies that we need to follow to ensure that we have adequate clean water in Minnesota for the next 50 years? And this touches on all kinds of things. This touches on our agricultural practices. This touches on whether or not we're going to embark on this risky endeavor of doing non-ferrous copper sulfide mining in northeastern Minnesota. This talks about the approach to stormwater and wastewater. There's a lot of work to do, and I will absolutely, if I have the honor of continuing to serve, I will continue to pursue that bill.
Great. Let's kind of continue on to climate change, clean water, climate change, a little related there.
Yeah.
How about accomplishments in that area in the past year or two?
Well, that's been a tricky one in our divided legislature, unfortunately. Governor Walz did implement his clean car rules, which starts to, in a pretty small way, quite frankly, starts to kind of push Minnesota toward using more electric vehicles on its roads. which I think is a net good. Transportation is our biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in Minnesota. So we have to get creative, and we're going to have to invest in helping people to both use public transit, and I'm a big proponent actually of rapid transit with electrifying buses that have more flexibility in where they can go, for example, than light rail. Light rail has a role as well. There's never one magic bullet that fixes it all, so we're going to have to come at it from a lot of different angles. So that's going to have to be a big priority of ours. Housing is another big contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So figuring out ways to make our buildings and our houses and our apartment buildings more efficient, it has to be a part of that solution. And then agriculture also is a contributor. And so helping farmers to adapt to new practices, like the Forever Green initiative coming out of the University of Minnesota, encouraging cover crop use, for example. That helps to clean the water and also helps to decrease soil erosion and helps to decrease greenhouse gas emissions as well.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit about the efforts around lawns to legumes that we've talked about?
Yeah. So this is a really fun program that I championed, and it was passed into law in the 2019 session. And it has been this really popular program that has gotten national and even international attention. And I think the reason is because all of us are aware of climate change, but some of us, I think, are spinning our wheels because we don't know what we can individually do. And this is sort of something tangible that pretty much all of us can do in some small way. So the gist of the Lawns to Legumes program is to provide micro grants to individuals and then also to have demonstration projects to help people transform their traditional lawn, and that can be a patch of grass, or it could even be, a little bit of balcony kind of plantings, into pollinator-friendly habitats by primarily planting native species that attract pollinators. We've seen this precipitous decline in our pollinator populations for a variety of reasons. But one is lack of food supply, because lawns don't provide any food for pollinators. Pollinators are key to our food supply. So if we lose them, there's a really scary chain reaction that will take place. So there's some really interesting research that shows that corridors in urban and suburban areas of native plants and pollinator-friendly plants can really bolster our populations. So Lawns to Legumes has been really popular. There's a huge waiting list right now, and it has also served to educate people. You'll see people with their bee-friendly signs in their yards. Mm-hmm. People are educating themselves about the use of fertilizers and pesticides and how that can impact water as well as pollinators. So that's been a really fun program and a successful one too.
Great. Okay, let's move on to infrastructure bills, and that's such a big topic, but I know some of the accomplishments become really local and personal to all of us in the communities around us. Can you talk a little bit about what has been accomplished that we can really visually see and appreciate?
Yeah, infrastructure is big, and across the state, we have aging infrastructure needs that are impressive that we really need to address, which is one of my big disappointments that we haven't passed a bonding bill yet this year. But over the last couple of years, I have worked with mayors and city councils and citizens to work on some of the areas that needs in our area. And some of the ones that we've gotten across the finish line and some have already been accomplished are critical water infrastructure in Spring Park. We repaired a dangerously aging bridge in Deep Haven, the Northbound Bridge, which has been renamed by the council for the late Mayor Paul Screedy, which is kind of nice because he worked for years to get that bridge fixed. So we were really happy to get that done. Senator Osmick and I teamed up to get that one accomplished, and that bridge is done and it's beautiful. We passed a law that allowed a fund transfer so that the Minnetonka Community Education Center could expand its building to accommodate the growing need for child and adult education, and that is done now too. Let's see, we passed, as part of the transportation bill, a grant of $1.5 million so that Minnetonka Middle School West could build a roundabout at that tricky intersection that's the entrance and exit to that building on 41. That's in process still, but we did get that passed, so that money is available. I'm currently working, really importantly, on a critical water infrastructure bill for Mound and Minnetonka Beach. The Mound water situation is really challenging, and it has been for a while. The citizens of Mound are kind of maxed out on how much they can contribute to it. It's really a burden on the people who live in Mound, and now they have this elevated manganese has been detected in the water, and so they've been told they can't drink their water. So we have a $24 million bonding bill that is sitting there ready for action. So I've been advocating for it. That is my number one priority in the bonding bill because of the urgency of the need. So if we are lucky enough to go back for a special session this year, I will certainly be advocating for that. And again, if I'm, have the honor of returning, that will be a huge priority. Oh, and one other thing that's kind of fun too, and that we all benefit from, is the Excelsior Commons had kind of fallen into some disrepair, and a lot of local people got together and created a nonprofit to help to support it. And we eventually were able to get this little local option sales tax passed in Excelsior so that they could use the proceeds from that to help repair and restore the Excelsior Commons. And we're already seeing the fruits of that labor. It's really looking great. They've got a new band shell, and they've got more plans coming. So that's a really great addition to our community, and that's a regional destination. So it's important that we keep that up.
Great.
So anything else that you would like to share with us?
Let's see. Well, one that I'm really proud of that did get across the finish line this year is providing service bonuses to 9/11 veterans. This has been the longest war in American history, so long that I think some of us kind of forgot it was still going on. And we have a large number of veterans who have sacrificed a lot, and our veteran community is minuscule compared to the general population. They have sacrificed a lot for all of us. Small number of people have sacrificed a lot for all of us. And Minnesota has had this really honorable tradition, I think, of giving service bonuses after American wars. And so we got that done. And so 9/11 vets and their Gold Star families are eligible for these service bonuses. I was a co-author on that bill. My husband's a veteran, and so I have just a real deep respect and appreciation for people who put on a uniform to protect all of us. So I'm really proud that got across the finish line.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Representative Morrison. Before I turn it over to Peg for a closing, I just want to put a quick plug in. The League of Women Voters South Tonka is going to have a candidate meet and greet on October 6th at the South Shore Community Center. More will come out about that, but just keep that on your calendar. You'll have a chance to meet candidates in our local elections and a chance to talk with them.
Another date to remember is September 15th. The League of Women Voters is also providing a forum on the Equal Rights Amendment. We will have speakers from the Equal Rights Amendment Minnesota and talking about how can we as people pass the Equal Rights Amendment permanently and ratify that amendment. So those are two upcoming things for our audience to be aware of and participate in. That ERA program will also be at the Sherwood Community Event Center. Thank you, Representative Morrison, for being here today to share your insights about the last legislative session and for your service. We appreciate all that you do for the citizens of our South Tonka area, and really welcome your help and participation in the helping people understand what happened last legislative session and what to look forward to next legislative session. So programs like this are part of the League of Women Voters does to make democracy work. We educate our members and our communities about issues, how government works, and we hold candidate forums about issues that are important to us and to you. We advocate for our positions at the local, state, and national levels. The League of Women Voters is nonpartisan, which means we do not support political parties nor candidates. Our South Tonka League is open to membership for all people ages 16 and above. We invite you to join us. We are We are looking forward to having new members to fulfill the mission in our area. If you want more information, you can go to our website, leagueofwomenvoters.southtonka.org. Finally, we'd like to thank the Lake Minnetonka Communication Commission for the opportunity to present this program, and to thank you for watching.